Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Luca Pellerano. I work for the ILO, and I'm welcoming you to this webinar from Beirut. Joined today by a fantastic team of panelists, and very happy to be hosting this conversation on the impacts of the COVID-19 crisis on formal sector workers, the ongoing and potential social protection and employment responses. Let me also start by wishing Ramadan Kareem to all of you who are observing the holy month of Ramadan, joining us from around the world. This is the 7th of a series of webinars who have been on the social protection response to COVID. The series is a joint effort of a number of partners that you see reflected in this slide. The IPCIG, GIZ on behalf of the Federal Minister of Social Development and Cooperation, BMZ, as well as the Australian Government of Department for Foreign Affairs and Trade, DFAT, in collaboration with the socialprotection.org platform and in cooperation with partners from different organizations. The webinar is part of an initiative which has two major components, and on online community on the topic to systematize information task force, to learn more about the initiative, find out how to collaborate, and keep updating about future webinars. There is take place on the 30th of April on the experience of the global curve, country to country learning and South-South cooperation. We invite all of you to register, and I very much hope you can hear me well. I know there may be some challenges in the line, but hopefully you can now hear me, and we continue with the presentation. Let me ask Karin just to confirm in the chat box that you can hear me. Great. So let me, as I mentioned, the next webinar is presented on this slide. It's going to be on the experiences of countries ahead of the global curve, country to country learning and South-South cooperation. So let us now move to the topic of our discussion today. And before then, I would like to introduce the panel of experts who are joining us to share experiences really from a selection of countries around the world with a very interesting diversity of context and backgrounds. So we have first Sebastian, who is a labor economist and social policy analyst at the OECD. Sebastian works in the Directorate for Employment, Labor and Social Affairs, and is a research affiliate at ISA in Bonn. He's also previously worked as a researcher at Statistics Norway and also as a consultant for the OECD and the World Bank. And he holds a PhD from the University of Oxford with his main research interest on income, wealth inequalities, and income support policies. So Sebastian will offer us some perspective on the response from the very privileged sort of viewpoint of the OECD. We now have my colleague Mohamed Noor Quraish, who is working for the Social Security Corporation in Jordan. Mohamed is the head of Research and Studies Department at the Social Security Corporation. He holds a Master in Corporate Finance from the University of Salford and has many years of experience in research, policy, management work in the area, particularly of Social Security, where he has been working for the Social Security Corporation for more than 15 years, as well as a broad experience of collaboration with various UN agencies, including the ILO. And he will share with us his perspectives as to the response that the social insurance system has put in place already in Jordan to protect particularly formal workers, but also with some insights as to the extension of that protection to informal workers. We are also joined by Raden, who is the head of the economy working group at the TNP2K team, which is the secretariat of the national team for acceleration of poverty reduction in Indonesia. Dr. Raden is heading the economy working group, which is a think tank under the office of the vice president. And he's also an associate professor at the Department of Economics at the Padjadjaran University in West Java. He's been working previously at the Center for Economics and Development Studies, and also holds a PhD from the Australian National University. Finally, but in no order of importance, we are also joined by Johannes, who is working at the Australian Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs, a senior official in the ministry and working in the field of international labour market policies, particularly with the EU, OECD, and ILO in the area of labour market research. He will share with us some insights on the response of the Austrian ministry or Austrian government to the ongoing challenges faced by workers, particularly in the formal sector. And as of me, I am Luca. As I mentioned, I am working for the International Labour Organization. I'm a senior social protection specialist for the Arab States region. And I am working here supporting countries in the region on the reform of social protection system, including very much on the COVID response. So we very much look forward to a rich discussion with all of you during the course of today. And we very much look forward as well to your interaction with the team, with the panel. So we encourage all of you in the audience to send questions to the panelists throughout the webinar. These questions will be gathered by the team and will be addressed to the best of our ability during the Q&A session that we will have at the end of the seminar, which hopefully will give us enough time for exploring and reflecting on the inputs that you will want to share with us. Wherever we will not manage to respond to the questions, we will get back to you with the written Q&A document, which will be shared to the audience so we can follow on maybe the more specific points that you may raise, and will be published together with the summary of our discussion today. And as mentioned, this will be available on the socialprotection.org special group and online community, social protection responses to COVID-19. So if you want to follow on the Q&A written document, as well as follow on subsequent series of these webinars, please join on the online community. So how will we go about the session today? After this brief introduction, I will share with you a few thoughts just to frame the discussion and offer a bit of a taxonomy or a map that can guide our discussion today. And we will then move on to a presentation by Sebastian, by Mohammed, by Raden, and by Johannes, each of them sharing insights from their perspectives before we open to the Q&A. So that's how we're going to go about it. I'm sorry you cannot see me, but I hope you can continue to hear me. And therefore, we can kick off with few thoughts from my side that can help us sort of frame the discussion for today. I wanted to start by putting back on the screen this slide, which you have seen in one of the very first presentations which were made as part of this webinar series by, I believe, Valentina Barca, a colleague of mine, who has shared some initial thoughts and an initial framework to understand and place the role of social protection in the COVID response. And that presentation provided this overarching framework by sort of mapping a complete range of measures and tools that governments have available to respond to the crisis, ranging from social insurance and contributory system to, in blue at the center, social assistance non-contributory system, and in red on the far right, labor market policy interventions. There is clearly a great challenge that many countries are facing to scale up all these systems in response to an unprecedented crisis that requires income support and support in accessing healthcare for large numbers of the population. And it is therefore in the complementarity of how these different tools come together that this response can be successful. In the discussion today, we will particularly focus on the extent to which these different tools available have been used and can be better used in response particularly to the needs, to the specific needs of formal workers. In previous series of these webinars, there have been a stronger focus on poor and vulnerable groups, as well as workers in the informal economy. Now, as this slide describes, there are two main directions of improvement and enhancement of the existing social insurance and labor regulation systems that are available to countries. And when we talk about social insurance and labor market instruments, we have already seen systems that provide access to paid sick leave, unemployment benefit, as well as other mechanisms to keep workers on employment, such as employment retention mechanism and wage subsidies, very much at the center of the response. And the approach taken by government has been twofold. On the one hand, to ensure that whatever exists is resilient, that can be put in conditions to respond to significantly increase to the demand that is being put on the existing social insurance and labor protection mechanisms by many hundreds of thousands of workers who find themselves in need of this protection through safety measures, exceptional financing, or ensuring surge capacity to respond to increased numbers of applications and demands. But equally, we are seeing how several countries are moving fast towards the adaptation of the existing social insurance and labor protection tools in such a way that it can be more adequate by providing higher amounts of payment, or by providing payments over in a more immediate time frame without long waiting periods, and also for longer periods, but also in terms of coverage by reducing or relaxing eligibility criteria, facilitating access, and extending in some cases to workers who were not previously covered, as well as in terms of comprehensiveness by better linking the existing social insurance and labor protection mechanisms with other complementary services. So in the next slide, I just want to make a point to mention how the next slide, please. The response that governments are putting together very much comes, particularly for formal workers, as a result of the integration of four different areas: business continuity support, labor protection, contributory social protection, and non-contributory social protection. Governments have to use all these levers in an integrated manner, and only a well-coordinated, consistent, and mutually reinforcing articulation of these four dimensions can lead to the expected outcomes, which are, on the one hand, to ensure that workers can access social protection they need in a comprehensive manner and in a timely manner. At the second level, that the business fabric and the productive capacity of countries is preserved, and therefore the capacity to recuperate and reinitiate and re-engage in economic processes is preserved. And third, that resources are used in a cost-effective manner. In the next slide, how countries are grappling with the scale of the response and some of the concerns that we are seeing emerging from country experiences around the world, particularly when it comes to covering formal sector workers. First, many countries are realizing the importance of preserving and protecting the employment relationship wherever possible, avoiding that workers become unemployed, retain workers before they lose their jobs, which is important not only for workers, but also to ensure that uh, businesses retain the skills and organizational needs so that they can quickly resume economic activity after the crisis. That's where business continuity is a critical dimension of social protection these days, and many of the country examples we will hear will speak to that. The second concern is that not all workers and businesses are affected equally. So not one size fits all. There are different conditions of businesses and also of workers, and the measures taken need to take those into account. And that the third is that in order to achieve universality in income protection, multiple instruments are required, a plurality of approaches that combine labor protection, different forms of income support, and also business continuity support. Many countries are also looking carefully, and under number 4, at how to ensure that in these times of crisis, labor protections are not eroded, but they are maintained without removing sort of the existing guarantees that are established by labor law, but rather helping businesses being in a position to afford those existing guarantees when it comes to leave pay or end of service indemnity, for example. Fifth concern, how to provide rapid relief, remove administrative barriers and bureaucratic barriers, but at the same time keep accountability and incentives right, to minimize the potential abuse or misuse of critically and limited public resources on businesses and workers who may not need those. And the sixth principle, very dear to the ILO, that consultation with workers and employers at national, sector and firm level is very key to ensure proper targeting, but also very importantly, acceptability and sustainability of the whole package of measures. So I just spoke to the diversity of businesses and workers, and I'm gonna very quickly sort of point to that in the next couple of slides. In the next slide, we see how, and it's a very important point to bear in mind, businesses across the economies are affected in very different ways according to two key factors. First is the permission to operate, whether they are in sectors which are allowed to remain active, which is primarily a function of public health considerations, but also the ability of businesses to continue to pay wages to workers depends on businesses' ability to operate, and which is a function of many other business characteristics, size, legal status, whether they're informal or formal, the liquidity, the state of market demand. So businesses will be affected dynamically, and their capacity to operate will change over time. And we see really a wide range of situations in which businesses find themselves. Some are fully operational or do not need support to keep workers on the payroll. Someone may be only partially operational, or maybe operational under new employment arrangements, such as work from home. Some may be suspended. Many countries have introduced new labor legislation which allow businesses to be on hibernation, not functioning, but also not paying salaries, at the same time not bankrupt. So it's a new typology of sort of labor regulation which is emerging in several countries. And of course, some businesses are also closing or going bankrupt. So that's from the perspective of businesses. From the perspective of workers, in the next slide, there are also different conditions that workers face. First and foremost, that depends on the level of the type of relation with the social security system. So in the next slide, you see that we can identify in most countries 4 groups of workers: those who are subject to labor protection and registered in social security, in social insurance. A second group, interestingly, workers who should be subject to labor and social protection, but they may not because of non-compliance. A third group, workers who are on account or self-employed or casual workers with some form of social insurance, either mandatory or voluntary covered. And the final group, who are workers who are not subject to forms of labor protection or social insurance. Again, the measures that and the tools that countries have to respond will have to differ for each of these groups. The next slide I will not speak to, but just shows you how the combination of this understanding of differences in businesses conditions as well as in workers condition creates a policy matrix which countries can use to understand where best to use the different tools that are available in providing income support to workers, whether through business continuity, whether through existing expansion of unemployment insurance or severance pay, whether through tax-funded social assistance or social insurance. It could be interesting to go back to this slide, which can be a conceptual framework to really see how to devise this complementarity in mechanisms that is required to provide a response at this time. I will leave it at this, and we can come back to some of the key sort of issues that can guide us in the discussion. We'll jump the next slide, and from this I will move on to the next presentation, so we can hear from Sebastian his perspectives on how to support people and companies to deal with the COVID-19 virus from the perspective of the OECD. Over to you, Sebastian.
Thank you very much, Luca, for the introduction. I've switched my camera on now, and I hope that this works. And otherwise, I guess Karina is going to send me a short message. Many thanks for the organizers, the fellow organizers, for setting this up, and for socialprotection.org for hosting. I'm very pleased about the large interest and about the possibility to present our work here. And I think the framework you've set out, Luca, is really, really helpful. And I think I'm going to build up on that, and maybe here and there add a bit of flesh to it and policy examples to it. The COVID crisis represents an enormous challenge for the societies around the globe. And fighting the pandemic and making sure that the health effects of this pandemic are as small as possible certainly comes first. But the interruptions in global value chains and the measures that have been taken until now by countries to contain and mitigate the pandemic are already now having enormous consequences for people's incomes and putting their livelihoods at risk. So countries around the globe have been taking measures, and often bold measures, to protect workers, to protect families, and to protect firms, much as like you've outlined, Luca, in your presentation. At the OECD, we've been trying to start and put together a menu of policy options that OECD countries and G20 economies mostly have in the employment and social policy domain, in bolstering the effects of the crisis on workers, families, and firms. And also, we've been trying to get an overview of what the measures are that countries have taken so far. This has been quite challenging because, as we all know, things have been moving very, very quickly, and we've been fighting hard to kind of keep track of what's happening, keeping track of the last changes, and kind of helping to contribute to the policy debate on what the menu of policy options is. The work that I'm presenting today comes from a policy brief that we've put together and released a couple of weeks ago on supporting workers, families, and firms. In this policy brief, we discussed this menu of policy options, and the policy brief comes with a big spreadsheet that we've put online, in which we track a lot of the measures that are being taken and that we constantly update. And so you might want to have a look at this. The work will also feed into a chapter of the Employment Outlook, which is going to be launched probably in the first week of July. This is the typical date around which we publish our Employment Outlook. And for this year, we had actually more or less completed the chapters for the Employment Outlook when the crisis started. And now we're putting very much at the last minute a chapter together on the COVID crisis. And it will evolve very much around what I'm discussing here. Next slide. So I'd like to start with a first impression of the likely impact that this crisis is going to have on the economies. What you can see here in this graph is a very rough estimate of the direct reduction in GDP that will happen during a partial or full shutdown in the most affected sectors in OECD economies. What we see is that the partial or full shutdowns that are happening now in a lot of OECD countries account for about 20, 25, 30% of GDP at current prices. I should say that this is very much a back on the envelope estimation, because at the moment we don't have reliable economic data yet on the impact. So what the colleagues in the Economics Directorate who've produced this graph, what they've done is basically to look at which sectors currently are being shut down either completely or partially, and just to look at how much of GDP these sectors account for. So what we see is that the impact on GDP of the current measures that are being taken, and that's really just the direct shutdown measures, is really, really huge. Another way of estimating this is that the colleagues have projected that the current shutdowns lead to a decline in GDP of about 2 percentage points for every month of shutdown. So the effect is really huge. What we will see on the next slide is then that this is directly transmitting onto labor markets. I don't know if we can switch to the next slide. So what we're showing on the next slide is a graph of the labor market data in the United States. I'll wait until the slides are switching. Karin, can we come to the next slide? Well, I can just tell you my story already, and then hopefully the slides are going to switch. There we go. Basically, the labor market data for OECD economies are only slowly starting to come in. So for many countries, we currently don't have precise estimates yet of what the likely labor market implications are of the measures that have been taken. For the countries where we do have these data, the results are actually quite dramatic. And what the graph that you're seeing is showing are the initial claims for unemployment benefits in the United States over the last decades or so. And what we see is that the numbers that we've been observing in the last weeks are really unprecedented. So the curve shows new unemployment insurance claims in every week. And what we've seen over the last 5 weeks is that there were about 24 million new claims in the United States, compared to a peak of about 1 million maximum during the global financial crisis. So in each of the last 5 weeks, we've seen about 3 million to 6 million new claims in the United States. So the impact has really been enormous. For the other countries where we have similar figures, we're observing trends that are maybe not quite as massive as in the United States, but still quite enormous. In Canada, for instance, we've seen 2 million new claims in the first 2 weeks of March alone, and this is the equivalent of the total fiscal year 2018 and 19. In Denmark, for which we have data, the claims are 3 times higher than on the same days in the average between 2015 and 19. In Norway, the first 3 months, we've seen more than 2 times the claims as the entire year 2019. And in the United Kingdom, we've seen 10 times as many claims as in normal times. So this is when we're looking at unemployment benefits. What we've seen in an increasing number of countries, and I think Johannes is going to go back to that in more detail later, is that one of the measures that countries have relied on very heavily during the crisis is an extension of short-time work schemes, where contracts that employers have with companies are basically maintained during the crisis, and essentially frozen, so that the company only pays a small part of the wage, while the employer continues to receive most of the salary from public authorities. These short-time work schemes have worked very, very well during the global financial crisis, and a lot of countries have either reactivated these schemes, expanded them, or introduced them now during the current crisis. And what we've seen is that in countries that have these schemes, the demand for participation in these schemes is really enormous. And the best example for this is probably France, where nearly 800,000 new company claims for short-time work, the chômage partiel, have been deposited in the last weeks, and that corresponds to about 10 million workers, or about half of the private sector employees that are on short-time work at the moment. In Germany, where the Kurzarbeit, the short-time work scheme, was very successful during the global financial crisis, during the Great Recession, we've seen about 650,000 new company claims just in the 2 last weeks of March, and this is about 20 times the largest increase we've seen during the last crisis. So the effects are really dramatic. What the next slide is then going to show is that the impact of these effects has been very uneven across labor market groups. So while the virus can essentially affect everyone and no one is immune, the economic effects of the virus have differed a lot across groups. And what you're seeing in this graph, this is a graph that comes from the Canadian economist Miles Korak, who's been doing frisk calculations at Statistics Canada using labor force survey. The legend is a bit small, but the curve you see in blue are thousands of employed in a professional, scientific, and technical service industry. So these are people that tend to be very high skilled, while the red curve gives you thousands of employed in accommodation and food services industry. So people who tend to be rather low skilled. And what we've seen is that while in the high skilled sector, the blue curve, there's been so far a very, very mild effect of the crisis. Only the employment in accommodation and food industries that is very much exposed to the crisis and that is much more low skilled has really collapsed. And the progress in employment, in total employment, basically of the last 2 decades has been undone in just a couple of weeks. Next slide. What we've been working on at the OECD is to start coming, as I said, coming up with a menu of different policy options. And in our policy brief that you find online, we've basically identified 6 different pillars of types of policies that OECD countries have been implementing in the last couple of weeks. The first one is reducing exposure of workers to COVID-19. Here we've primarily seen a very dramatic expansion of telework across many sectors where this is possible, and a lot of countries have moved to relax existing legislation on telework or introduce new options for telework. And some countries have taken very concrete steps at assisting small and medium-sized enterprises to develop their teleworking capacity. One example of that is Japan, that provides financial subsidies of up to 50% to companies, small and medium-sized enterprises that invest in teleworking equipment. So this is financial support. We also have logistical support, for instance, in Italy, where the Ministry of Innovation has set up a website with different tools that companies can use to facilitate telework. The second pillar is then income support for sick and quarantined workers. This was especially important in the early weeks of the crisis, but it's also getting important as we're moving out of the crisis. Most OECD countries provide paid sick leave either first through employers who usually continue paying their employees when they get sick, usually for a week or 2. Afterwards, there are sickness benefits that are paid by public authorities, and that can be paid for up to a year, or in some countries even longer. So a lot of countries had this system in place and could activate it or could use it during the current crisis. There are a couple of exceptions, however. For instance, Korea and the United States, where no such paid sick leave systems exist on a broader scale. And the United States is one of the examples of countries that have taken very concrete measures in this crisis in extending paid sick leave to workers that are affected by the current crisis. Because part of this paid sick leave is employer provided, one other focus of many countries has been to reimburse employers for the cost of providing this paid sick leave. Because in normal times, the financial burden of this is not enormous, but in the current times where a lot of workers are sick or are sick at home taking care of sick relatives, or forced to quarantine because they show symptoms or because they've been traveling to areas that have been very affected, there's been kind of a wave of, likely a wave of paid sick leave claims. And countries have been moving to reimbursing employers for the cost of this to make sure that they remain liquid. The third pillar is helping families and notably parents dealing with unforeseen care needs. What we've seen in by now nearly all OECD countries is that as a result of the lockdown, schools and childcare facilities have started closing, which means that parents need to find alternative care arrangements for their children and schooling arrangements as well. This can be possible for those who can telework, who are fortunate enough. For them, it's difficult enough to juggle work and childcare responsibilities, but it's really, really hard for all of those who can't telework and who need to go to work because they're physically required at the workplace, including a lot of those occupations that are actually fighting at the forefront of the virus. One solution that a couple of countries, including Austria, Germany, and France, the UK have implemented is to keep some minimum childcare and schooling facilities open, at least for these staff that are urgently needed during the crisis, notably people in caring professions and in medical professions. But a lot of countries have also been moving to extend special leave and to pay special leave for parents that need to stay at home to take care of their kids. Next slide, please. As you see, a fourth pillar of countries' response to the crisis, which I've already mentioned, is the rapid extension of short-time work. And I think I'm not going to go into a lot more detail here because I think Johannes is going to talk at the very end. He's going to give an introduction to the Austrian scheme, and I think he can do a much better job at this than I can. So we come to the fifth pillar. The fifth pillar is income support to workers who, despite of the efforts that are being made, and notably despite short-time work, who lose their jobs or self-employment income. In most OECD countries, we do have relatively strong social safety nets in place, notably the first tier is unemployment insurance benefits, but then also lower tier social assistance benefits. So most people, standard workers who do lose their jobs, would qualify for these benefits and have some of their income losses cushioned. Still, a couple of countries where these schemes may be less comprehensive or where access, particularly for self-employed, for instance, is restricted. They've broadened these schemes either to include self-employed or to increase the maximum duration of these benefits or to increase generosity. One example, again, is a bit like in the previous crisis, are the United States, where these schemes exist but are relatively less generous, and where massive efforts have been taken in just extending benefit durations and increasing benefit amounts now during the crisis. And that brings me to the last part. And that's the financial support provided to firms affected by a drop in demand. We're seeing that notably a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises and a lot of independent contractors, a lot of self-employed people are very much struggling with the lack of demand that we're observing at the moment. And nearly all OECD countries, I think over 90%, have stepped up financial support for these companies. This has taken the form of direct cash transfers to small and medium-sized enterprises, and notably to self-employed workers, but also different types of grant and loan guarantees to make sure that they get by and that they maintain the liquidity over the next couple of weeks and months. And I think I'm going to stop here. If we could switch to the last slide. The last slide gives a quick overview of some of the work we've done at the OECD just on the COVID crisis over the last weeks. I'd like to point particularly to the work that the colleagues in the health division have done on measures to contain and mitigate the pandemic, on the system responses, the health system responses to COVID-19, and then also on the way forward and on the role of different types of testing as a way to lifting confinement restrictions. The brief that I've been taking my material from is available on the website as well, and we've uploaded some of the briefs as well to the website page of socialprotection.org. But you can find all of them on www.oecd.org and then coronavirus. And there you also find a lot of materials on various other areas, including tax policy, environmental policy, and economic policy. And I think I'm going to keep it there. So this was a brief overview, but I'm very happy to take questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, for a great overview of measures taken in OECD countries. I think you've pointed not only to the scale of the impacts, both on the economy, and of course on incomes, but also very importantly on the fact that the effects are potentially very heterogeneous, and therefore that the crisis could lead to very significant increases in inequalities. And you've also given us a very interesting flavor of the sort of wide variety of measures that are needed and are being taken, ranging from adaptation of business models to mechanisms to provide cash benefits during sick leave, to other measures that look more at addressing income replacement for those workers who have to take care of their family members during these particular times, to the use of wage subsidies, other forms of business continuity mechanisms to keep workers on payroll, and finally to measures to step up direct income support to particular categories of workers. Mainly, you also spoke to sort of the importance of recognizing differences in labor market, for example, between employees and self-employed, and to have measures that are somehow taking account of the most appropriate vehicles to reach to workers depending on their employment status. I think this is going to be a framework within which we can now hear more specific country experiences, and we're now going to go to Mohammed, who is going to tell us a bit, tell us the story of how the government of Jordan, and particularly the Social Security Corporation, has or is in the process of taking measures to respond to the crisis. Over to you, Mohammed.
Thank you very much, Luca, and I'm very honored and pleased to be among you guys and to present my country case to the colleagues and to the audience. And many thanks for the organizers from the ILO and Social Protection team. Actually, as all of us know, that this is very new, at least to our generation, and it's affected everybody around the globe. So no one recipe for facing or responding to such a pandemic or to such a crisis. So Jordan has started. We have started very early when it comes to facing this crisis and to this COVID-19 crisis. Just very quickly, if you can go to next slide, please. I want to shed the light on quick facts about the Jordanian Social Security Corporation. We are a contributory scheme and providing unemployment insurance, old age, disability, and death, work injuries, and maternity social insurances, in addition to providing some extra benefits like providing small loans to pensioners. We have a mandatory scheme and voluntary scheme as our coverage scope for waged and salaried workers. We have around 1.4 million workers as insured persons. which means 65% of workers in Jordan, and we are covering Jordanians and non-Jordanians. And we have the female 20% and the male 71% of the insured persons. Our assets around 16 billion USDs, and we are still in the booming curve of as a corporation. So this is the quick facts about the Social Security Corporation. The next slide is showing the general framework that the Social Security Corporation, among the other players, we believe that we have to ensure the business continuity, the income support, and the social protection for the people through the main mechanisms and tools that Luca mentioned in his introductory presentations, within the principles that can guarantee that we are delivering the right and targeting the right people in this very hard time. So the next slide showing that we are in Jordan. We actually have this slogan to leave no one behind in this crisis. So if Karen moved to next slide, you can see that our slogan is to leave no one behind. So the next slide also talking about when we have started very early, the country called the state of emergency in one condition, and this condition is not to harm the human rights and the freedom of the people. So the state of emergency means that the cabinet can issue defense orders to manage and to respond to the crisis. And actually this is very important in such a crisis. So the related defense orders, the Social Security Corporation most related defense orders, Defense Order 1, 6, and 9. So the Jordan Social Security, the JSSC measures, if you can move to the next slide, please. Actually, to ensure the next one, please, to ensure the business continuity for the corporation by itself. So we have established the crisis management team, call center to receive the applications and inquiries from the people. We invested more in the electronic and online services, and actually this gave us the opportunity to complete all the projects and programs related to the electronic and online services. And also we activated the working from home procedures for our staff, and the coordination with the major players in the social protection arena in Jordan. We have a social protection team consisted of Social Security Corporation, National Aid Fund, the Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Social Development, Central Bank of Jordan, and others. And also we are still coordinating with the military, because the military and the security agencies whom have the right to move freely in the streets. So it's very important to coordinate and to not overlap the work among the agencies. Next slide, please. So the business continuity for firms covered, it was the defense order number 1. We gave the institutions the right to relax the contributions. So we lowered the contributions from 21.75% to 5.25%. This is reflected 75% of the contributions, and actually this is a great support from the SSC to the firms and to establishments, because we want to keep the private sector working and moving, and we don't want to see more unemployed people. Also, we gave the mandatory employees whom working in the mandatory scheme the right to contribute voluntarily in these 3 months. So we relaxed the contributions just only for 3 months, which is the April, May, and June, and we continue the covering the insured persons with disability, death, unemployment, and maternity insurances. So we just relaxed the contribution for the old age. Also, we gave the choice for the establishments and for the covered firms to pay or to let's say to settle their installments or their payments to the SSC until 2023. Next slide, please. Also, when it comes to the third pillar of our work is to guarantee the income support for the people. So we allocated 50% of the maternity insurance contributions for the year 2020 to be used to provide in-kind and cash transfers for the people. We targeted the daily workers and the elderly people whom age plus 70. So we used the coupons, the food stamps, and the food packages to provide such services. The next slide showing the escalation of the income support that we have used based on the unemployment insurance scheme. So we have designed 3 main programs during this crisis. The first one called Solidarity Program, the second one also Solidarity Program 2, the third one the Supportive, and also we extended the coverage of the unemployment insurance to workers still on parole, and we leased or loosened the restrictions and the eligibility conditions. Actually, the Solidarity Program 1 to provide unemployment insurance benefits to employees their firms already covered and registered, and Solidarity Program 2 provide unemployment insurance benefits to the employees their firms not registered or not covered. We can say that they are working informally or not registered. This time I do want to use the contribution evasion terminologies, but let's say that they are not registered. So these are the main income support programs that we have designed as a fourth pillar. The next slide showing the overview of the measures that we have used. So the top or the headlines of the table showing that the measures included companies who are authorized to work and companies authorized to reduce operations and companies authorized to go into hibernation or workers who are dismissed, and for the voluntary registered and the self-employed. So the defense order number 6 related to the labor protection aspects and how to keep providing the salaries and wages for the people and for the employees and workers among these kind of breakdown or segregation of the employers in Jordan. The nature of the Social Security Corporation engagement, it depends on the wage subsidy from the SSC provided to co-financing from employer. If you are registered, you will take with at least 20 months, reducing the eligibility and covering 50% of monthly salary through the unemployment insurance. And if the employees are not registered, so also we extended the eligibility for the not registered firms and institutions. So these are the kinds of the programs that we have provided. Actually, I've provided my presentation with an annex that provided more clarifications and more elaboration about these programs. But for the time thing, so I'm trying to go very quickly and to give some hints and glances about the situation in Jordan. So the next slide is talking about the opportunities. So this crisis, it's not only about the challenges and about the harms that happened to the economy of Jordan or to the SSC or to the labor market. Also, we have a lot of opportunities arised from this crisis, which is, it's an opportunity for the formalization. Just today, the colleagues went to the streets under the, please go back to the opportunities slide, Karen. So the colleagues today conducted a mass awareness campaign in the field from the north to the south, from northern to the southern sides of the country to illustrate to the people the concept of social security and to help them to register for the social security, mainly for the not registered and not covered corporations, and also enhancing the investments on the online and electronic services. This is very important. We have improved a lot in this domain, but we still have some percentages. So we completed this. So after the COVID-19 crisis, we are not going to receive people in our branches. We are going to provide our services online. Also, it opens the door to have more coordination and to learn lessons from our previous opportunities, so to provide more coordination of the players, mainly with the Central Bank of Jordan, with NAF and the others. And it's an opportunity and a room for innovative ideas and solutions. The challenges that we faced, which is showing up in the next slide, the availability of resources for the unemployment insurance scheme. So we have to look into more resources if the crisis continues, and the sustainability in case of covering micro businesses on account and daily workers, because we have started to work on the new design for a social insurance or a scheme designated for such workers. Actually, one of the biggest challenges, the non-Jordanians and refugees. As you all know that in Jordan, we are hosting more than 3.5 million non-Jordanians as refugees and as expatriates whom living in or foreigners whom living in Jordan. So this is a huge challenge for us. And many thanks to God that in Jordan we have a lot of friends around the globe and a lot of colleagues whom trying to help us. And also among the challenges, the administrative capacity. Again, thank you very much, guys, to have me on this webinar. And I hope that I succeeded in deliver Jordan experience when it comes to providing social protection to former workers. Thank you very much. Over to you, Luca.
Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you a lot for this overview of the measures taken by the SSC. You touched on several important points. The need to make the social security system more resilient in terms of its own capacity to respond, but also you outlined the many actions that the SSC has taken to expand coverage, relax eligibility criteria, and also to take opportunities out of the crisis to advance with the process of extension of coverage and formalization, which I think is a very interesting example. Maybe we will have some questions on that, as well as on the challenges that remain. You highlighted the differences of workers in the labor force, particularly challenges for non-Jordanian workers. The point that strikes me in the example of Jordan is really how matters of labor protection and matters of social protection are very closely integrated. It's actually two sides of the same coin. The new measures that the government of Jordan has announced from a labor regulation perspective have be matched by new measures from the social protection perspective, and really countries have to advance on these two agendas, see these two agendas hand in hand. Hopefully that's a point we can also come back to. Before moving on to Mr. Raden, let me remind all participants that you're very welcome and invited to share your questions on the chat bar, so we can have a good discussion shortly after we hear from Mr. Raden, and Johannes will open up for questions. So please send yours through. Mr. Raden, over to you to give us some perspectives on challenges and solutions for formal sector employees in Indonesia. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Luca. Good evening from Indonesia. Good afternoon or good morning to you all. So I'm really honored to be participate in this forum. So many thanks for the organizers to have me here. So I will share a bit about what's happening in Indonesia and how the government actually respond to it. So as of today, there are more than 9,500 confirmed cases of COVID in Indonesia, with around 8% of casualties. And almost 50% of the cases is actually in the capital city of Jakarta. So, and sadly, we still see that the additional positive cases still exists. Although we already done this social distancing and working from home for about a month now. So now the government actually put a stricter lockdown, especially in the red zone, right? So this policy has to be in place to hold people from move from the red zone to the outer area. So as you may aware, now is the month of Ramadan, and in the end of the month of Ramadan, we have Eid al-Fitr, where most of Muslims usually celebrate and go back to their home village, right? So to prevent that from happening, actually the government now forbid citizens to go to their home village, right? And as for the 25th of April, no airlines and buses actually allowed to carry passengers to and from the most affected area. So you can imagine that most of the workers in that sector is actually affected by this. So this 1 month of physical distancing actually already taking tolls. So as of 20th April, there are already more than 2 million workers actually being laid off or forced to be unpaid leave, right? If we also include the number that actually have like half paid, it's going to be larger than that. So this number actually mostly from the formal sectors, because they actually obliged to report it to the Ministry of Manpower. So next, please. So to put you in the context, right? To put it in the context, we have like almost 200 million working age populations, with 126 million working, right? Most of them working in the informal sectors, with the unemployment rate of 5.2%, right? And you know the predictions of growth after this crisis is quite good. So the government itself, predict that the growth is going to be 2.1% from previously 5%. And for the worst case scenario, it's going to be a minus 0.4. But the World Bank actually predict more severe decline in growth to minus 3.5%. So next. So next, please. So the government actually already put some economic stimulus to lessen the impact. So there's already 3 packages of stimulus that the government had rolled out. So the first stimulus is in the end of February, but it's mostly act as consumption stimulus to boost the demand. So at the time, government actually didn't really expect that the spread's gonna be like today, right? So the size of the stimulus is not that big, and also the coverage is mostly on the economic side. The second stimulus is on the mid of March. It's around $9.4 billion equivalently. So it's still, focusing on the economic stimulus to lessen the impact of this COVID, right? For the third stimulus, it's been rolled out just the end of March. When the thing is getting worse, so the government now really thinks that we have to do more on this and roll out like $24.7 billion dollars for that one. So the difference between the second and the third is the second is more on keeping the ability to pay by the workers by giving some tax exemptions and ease of exporting for manufacturing and also importing medical stuff, right? And also food. Next, please. So if we break down the stimulus, especially for the third stimulus, we can see that the government now placing also a concern on the social safety net, right? So it increased the budget for the social safety net by 110 trillion rupiah. And also the put aside also some for the health assistance programs. But still, if you look at the number, the stimulus for economics is actually still major part, right? It's like more than 50%, 54% of the budget is for supporting the economy. So, so how actually we done this in Indonesia? So it's unlike Jordan that actually relied on the social system, the social protection system that already exists. In Indonesia, we are more relying on the social safety net. Next, please. So in Indonesia, we have this social welfare unified database that cover 40% of the poor and vulnerable peoples in Indonesia by name and address. So if you compare with the poverty rate, the last figure of the poverty rate is 9.2%, which cover like 24.8 million people. And we have several social protection programs in here, but I'm gonna show you the biggest two. So the first one is the conditional cash transfer. Previous one, still here. So, still the previous one. Yes. So the family conditional cash transfers is actually cover 10 million households or 51.6 million people. So it's covered like around 20% of the populations. And also on top of that, we have the food voucher programs that actually been given to 15.2 million households, right? So that's the existing programs. For this crisis, actually the government expand the social safety net. It's not only expanding, but also give some additional money that's been given before. So for the first phase, they given like 4.8, expanding to additional 4.8 million households, and expanded more to 9 million households. So the all 40% of the unified database is actually going to be covered. So next. So what about the formal workers? Once again, we don't have actually really good data for whether somebody's informal or formal, except for those actually registered in our national security system for employment. So for the formal workers, that the one that they can have is actually first is the tax exemptions. So it's targeted actually for manufacturing industry workers where they cannot work from home for sure. So the taxpayers that earns less than 200 million rupiah a year, or equivalent to $12,000 a year, is going to be given tax exempts, right? And we also have loan relaxation for the small and medium enterprises, where they actually have a deferred payment for the amount that they have to pay monthly, and also the interest subsidy, right? And it's now actually being broadened not only to the government programs but also to other sectors as well. Right? We also give the free electricity for house with 400 volt ampere and 50% of. But one thing that I would like before I finish is that we have this pre-employment card, right? It's actually a training programs using vouchers, but now actually been shifted a bit to the social security. So the amount of money that usually have to be allocated to the trainings now going also half of trainings and another for social protections, right? So it's going to be like 1 million for online trainings because we cannot have the face-to-face trainings, and 1,600 thousand rupiah a month for 4 months, right? And it will cover 5.6 beneficiaries. But now in the first 2 weeks of this program's opening, it's already like 8 million actually registered from this. So yeah, we have like more and people that actually affected by this crisis. So that's from me. I'm happy to take any question after this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Raden. A lot of insights from the Indonesian experience. I think particularly you spoke about the combination of economic financial stimulus package, but as well as, and within it, not only support to businesses, but direct support to the scale up of existing social protection schemes. You spoke about the importance of data and how you're leveraging of your unified registry to actually quickly deliver support to those families you have identified in that registry and scale up programs that are linked to that registry. But you also spoke about how other systems can be leveraged to expand protection, the tax system, loan relaxation. You spoke about his experience of the training voucher, which has been sort of turned into a mechanism for income support, also use of subsidies. So really how countries are using all ammunition and all tools in the toolbox to reach out, and where of course one of the important points is how these measures can be best coordinated and you know, in synergy with each other. Let us now move to the final input on the case of Austria from Johannes, and then we'll open up for questions. I realize we're a bit, you know, we're a bit late with schedule, but we hope we can still count with you for another sort of 20 minutes, 25 minutes, so we can have at least one round of questions at the end of Johannes' presentation. Please continue feeding through your question. We've received some and happy to receive more so we can have a good round of comments at the end. Johannes, over to you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Can you hear me? Everybody?
Yes, go ahead.
I would like to start with two preliminary remarks. The first one is the formal sector in Austria is rather small. It's 5 to 10% of GDP is the informal sector. Sorry, the formal sector is more than 90% of GDP. The second remark is referring to the state sector. We collect some 40%, 42% of GDP as taxes and social security contributions. This makes it's easier to have large packages. Please, next slide, please. I have three messages. The first one is economic forecasts are surrounded at the moment with extreme uncertainties. So I try to look at the very short-term development on daily figures because I would like to ask the question: what can we learn from this very short-term development? The second message is the Austrian government tries with a rescue package of some 10% of GDP to stabilize expectations. We take in a historical sense, we take a lot of money to stabilize the expectations. And the third message is that short-term work is helpful in the short run, but is very costly in the medium to long run. These are my three messages. Next slide, please. The outlook for Austria is very bleak. The IMF expects 7 decrease in GDP of 7%. This is a historical figure. The unemployment rate goes up, but not dramatically. It goes up from 4.5 to 5.5%. But the government deficit is expected to be at about minus 6.6% of GDP. So the outlook is, as I said, is very bleak. The next slide, please. What is very interesting in Austria is that the unemployment figures rose in the first 3 weeks of the downturn dramatically. They rose by about 70% from the 15th. In this chart you see daily figures. It starts from the 27th of February and it ends yesterday or the day before yesterday. So these are daily figures of unemployed persons in Austria. And as I said, we had a huge increase in unemployment in 3 weeks. And after 3 weeks, we had a leveling off of this increase. So we had no more increase in unemployment. The inflow to unemployment was close to zero. This is a remarkable development, I suppose. We could all I want to say is that we could stabilize the inflow into unemployment, and this is really remarkable given the historic downturn. The reason why we could stabilize the inflow into unemployment is on the next slide. Oh, sorry. This is another slide. It shows the total labor supply in tourism sector, which is most affected by the downturn, and the total economy. In the above schedule, you see that there are only few people, only 70% of the total labor force in the tourism sector is employed, and 83% are out of work, either short-term work or unemployed. In the total economy, the situation is not that bad. We have some 40% out of work. They are either unemployed or in short-term work. This is the situation, the current situation in April. Okay, next slide, please. These are the regulations of the short-time work. I will be very brief. The basic idea is that you do not get in the downturn. The companies do not get rid of their employees. They keep in touch with them, and the employees can reduce the working time to 10% of the total working time, and they can do it for 3 months and then prolong for another 3 months. and the net income is between 80 to 90%, and this is paid by the Public Employment Service. The employer has almost nothing to pay, but there is an administrative burden. But as I said, it's almost with no costs for employers. Okay, the next slide, please. This slide shows this is a long time series of inflow into short-term work and expenditures. It starts with in the year 1998 and it ends in 2020. But in 2020 there are only 3 months, and as you see, compared with the financial crisis in 2009, the short-time work is about 50 times the inflow in short-time work, and the expenditures are 50 times higher than 12 years ago or 11 years ago. This is historical. This is a historical situation. We spend some 2% of GDP, but this is only these are the expenditures for 3 months. So if we have another three months of this high take up in short-term work, then we have 4% of GDP. This is an unbelievable high expenditure. This was, as I said, this is historic. This is new in historical terms. So the next slide. I'm ready. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Johannes. Indeed, starking figures you have shared, and also you have told us a bit more as to one of the key instruments that the government has taken to respond through this sort of wage subsidy scheme, but also you have pointed to the concerns of the fiscal implications of these measures and on sort of the long-term cost that such an approach could take, points on which we can refer in the discussion. So we have about 5 minutes of normal time, and I've been just granted by the seminar organizer another 10 minutes of extra time. So we have about 15 minutes for discussion. We have received a few questions, and some of which were directed to specific panelists, others of more general nature. So let's start with the first round of comments. We'll go first with to Sebastian, and asking Sebastian to respond to questions we got number 1 and 3, which refer to sort of you know, the picture you've presented is speaking mainly to OECD countries who have more developed social security and also sort of tax systems. What would you think could be the starting point to extend protection to formal workers, particularly for more middle-income countries who have possibly weaker pre-existing social security and other systems to reach out? And the second, what have you picked in terms of interesting measures, particularly for the self-employed, which are, as we have heard from some country examples, somewhat harder to reach category with measures of protection? Sebastian.
Yeah, thanks for these questions. I think the challenge in these times, and that applies to OECD economies as much as to middle income countries, is to make sure that the payments that are being made remain targeted, just because a lot of these policies are extremely expensive, as Johannes has outlined. So countries can't really afford to make too broad payments to households, families that maybe don't need them. That's the first point. And the second point is to make sure that these payments are being made very quickly, because the need is there immediately. whether you're talking about workers or families who are forced to stay at home and can't work anymore and don't receive salaries, or whether you're talking about companies and self-employed that are being shut down. What we see also in some of the OECD countries that have less comprehensive social security systems is that lump sum payments are being made. So instead of going through the social insurance system and maybe the standard automatic stabilizers is making lump sum payments. In the US, for instance, just simple checks have been sent to all households because this is just a very quick measure. The disadvantage there is obviously that it goes also to households that may not necessarily need it, including my American colleagues at the OECD, I believe. I think what a lot of countries have done is making targeted lump sum payments to families, because families, particularly with small children, generally face much higher poverty rates, and this can be one solution. The other question is, of course, how you can keep people in work, and there it depends a lot on how the pandemic itself is developing. If we're in a situation where economies are in full lockdown, there's just very little you can do in ensuring that there is still work to do for people, because that might be exactly the opposite of what we want to encourage people to do. We don't want people to go out and work. But presumably at some point, if the crisis is over and the economy picks up again, the question is, what can governments do to stimulate demand and stimulate job creation? That was the first point. In terms of support to the self-employed, what we've seen in a number of countries in the OECD has been, again, just simple, more or less lump sum payment to the self-employed. So the self-employed, also in OECD countries, tend to be much less well covered by standard social protection systems, by insurance-based systems, because often these systems are voluntary, or they don't provide any access at all. That applies to unemployment benefits, but that also applies to sickness benefits, for instance, that now matter a lot. It also applies to the possibility of getting special leave if kids are at home because the school is closed. And what countries have been doing, also again, because this is just a very quick measure, it's just making lump sum payments to small companies, maybe just based on the number of employees they have. And Germany, for instance, has been paying a certain amount, a few thousand euros, to all companies of less than 5 employees, and a slightly larger amount to slightly larger companies. The problem with that is obviously that, again, this is very expensive, and these are not measures that you can sustain over month and month. And at the moment, we have very little perspective, very little visibility on how this crisis is gonna develop. I think a lot of countries going into the crisis kind of had the assumption that this will be a very short crisis, a massive blow at the start, but then a quick recovery. And the challenge now is that we see that maybe the recovery is not going to be so quick, because certain sectors will not go back to operation very quickly. And in these cases, it's unclear to what extent these payments that have been made can be sustained over a longer period. But I don't know, maybe Johannes wants to add something from an Austrian perspective there.
Thanks, Sebastian. In fact, I wanted to go to Johannes exactly on this point of sort of targeting, and you know, you mentioned that these short-term measures have been quite effective in terms of, you know, reaching out and providing income support and you know, opportunities for retention of workers or to large number of workers, but that they may not be sustainable in the long run. We've seen how this crisis is dynamic, and that businesses and sectors may be affected quite differently. How would you see countries can manage this trade-off between needing to tailor response to businesses and sectors which are particularly need, while at the same time ensuring fast and universal protection where is required?
I'm not sure if I got the question right, but the problem is that the short-term work scheme is by intention, it's not targeted. Every firm and every company can apply for and if they have a social partner agreement, the Public Employment Service cannot refuse to pay the money. This is on the one side, it's a good aspect because it has an extreme stabilizing effect in the sense that the incomes of the people are stable in the crisis. In the extreme downturn, you have a injection of confidence, and this is extremely important in the way that you work on the conditions that to overcome the crisis. So this is the reason that these short-term schemes are not targeted. They are general. On the other hand, you cannot work with this program very long, as I said, because it's too expensive. So it's necessary. These programs work in case that the crisis is a short one. You cannot do this for 2 years. You cannot even do it for 1 year. And it has another aspect. The employees or the workers who are on the edge, on the fringe of the labor market. So the precarious jobs. Many of them are not included. And these are, in many cases, these are persons coming from abroad, from Romania, for example. We have in the care sector, we have many women in particular who come from Romania, and they are not included in these short-term schemes because they are self-employed formally. They are de facto they are not, but they are. So we have a problem on the precarious part of the workforce. I'm not sure if my point is clear.
Thank you, Johannes. Yes, it's very clear, and I think it's also a good intro to a couple of questions that Mohammed got, which were also touching on the same subject of the non-national workers and what mechanisms can be put in place effectively to provide protection to non-national workers. In the context of Jordan, there was a specific question about refugees, but I also would like, in addition to this point, Mohammed, to reflect a bit on the point on the self-employed, because I know that in Jordan there is an ongoing discussion as to what categories of self-employed workers are best covered, let's say, under the contributory social protection system, or could be covered under an extended contributory system through the SSC, and what categories under the tax-funded social assistance scheme. So you may have some thoughts to offer on that point as well, Mohammed. Over.
Thank you very much, Luca. Just very quickly, about the questions. Let's say, regarding, the question for more elaboration about the refugees during COVID-19, just very quickly, Jordan, the SSC is not responsible about the refugees in Jordan. So but Jordan as a country, and from the first day of the crisis, all the refugees dealt with like the Jordanians and like anybody in Jordan, from the testing for the coronavirus, from providing the other kinds of social protection, the cash transfers, the food stamps, food packages, and etc. But the refugees, they are not under the mandates of the Social Security Corporation. To make it very clear, they are under the mandates of the United Nations, and mainly the UNHCR and the other UN agencies. But there is a coordination between the UN agencies and between the government of Jordan. Also, for the self-employed, we have already some self-employed employers. They are registered under the SSC, and they have been provided with benefits from the SSC, and they are very small bulk. We are looking for the let's say the biggest bulk of the self-employed. At the meantime, the self-employed dealt with through the National Aid Fund, because the National Aid Fund, which is non-contributory scheme, providing, they have the NAF has started to provide benefits to the self-employed and to the own account workers and to daily workers during this crisis, and just to be sure about the future, we have started conversation with the ILO to design or redesign the self-employed program under the Social Security Corporation. And also, there was a question about the complementarity between the contributory and non-contributory schemes. I think in Jordan, we have put in place an excellent framework for the complementarity between the contributory and the non-contributory. Also, there is a question about the supportive program, which is program 3, about supporting it's for the registered Jordanians and non-Jordanians. They have they can draw and disperse from their saving accounts, which is working under the unemployment insurance, and they can draw from their lump sum compensations with a maximum of 5% of this lump sum compensation, with a ceiling of around 700 USDs distributed over 3 months. Because of the lack of the time, I would be very happy to answer all the questions in a written way or through a direct email or through the social protection and ILO team. I hope I answered and got all the questions, Luca.
Thank you, Mohammed. Thanks indeed. Let us go also with one question to Dr. Raden. There were several addressed to you, and we will come back to those in detail in the Q&A follow-up. But there was one specifically on the Prakarya program, which was sort of investigating more on mechanisms for allocating support and criteria for selection. And whether you have any data if applicants belong more to the formal sector being laid off now during the crisis or in the informal sector. So over to you for that question specifically, Dr. Raden.
Okay, thank you, Kak. So the Prakarya program is actually a new program. So initially, it's only focused on the trainings, right? Both online or offline. But due to the crisis now, so the government actually moved away a bit to more to social protection side, right? So because we cannot do the offline trainings, so it's more the online. And the coverage actually is already being doubled. So previously, the budget for that program is 10 trillion rupiah, but now it's 20 trillion rupiah. So previously, we can cover 2 million beneficiaries, now increased to 5.6 million beneficiaries. So how does it work? So actually, it is a programs that require people to online. Right? So people have to go register online, and they're gonna be asked some specific questions, but the work status, whether he's actually a wage workers or self-employed, and so forth. And there is also specific question whether he actually been affected directly by the COVID. Right? So that question is actually for our what informations, right? And we also have another information actually from the ministries, from the local governments who actually been laid off and so on and so forth, right? So it's not first come first serve basis. We're gonna actually select the applicants, and it's gonna be rolled out every week. So for the first week, we actually have like 200,000 applicants that actually been getting the benefits, and the next weeks we're gonna have more on that, right? So because this is actually the first week of the programs rolling out, so still have some problems here and there, but we're trying hard to make it happen. So the people, if they get the benefit, they can choose any programs, online training programs that are available in 8 marketplaces. And after they finish the trainings, they can have the 600,000 in form of social assistance, right, for the next 4 months. So that's the benefit. So one way for us to know whether he's formal or informal is just from the question that been answered. And also we try to actually match the data that we gather from the ministries, right? But the problem is that, the information that's being collected by the ministry actually is not the same with the data that we have. So there is some cleaning process that we have to go through. So,
Thank you.
We have actually planned to extend the programs. The government actually gonna see whether it's work or not, and if it works, I don't know. Maybe the government will extend, but I'm still don't know. It's really a dynamic situations, and also to add to all is that the local government actually also have some additional programs to support those who doesn't get any support from the central government.
Thank you very much, Raden. Thank you for this very interesting details at how, in this case, I think quite an innovative idea of using an existing program with already, with capacity to identify potential beneficiaries as a vehicle for providing income support in a way, in a diversion from its intended purpose, but very much as an effective way to provide much needed support in a timely manner. So I would like to thank all of you on the panel for very, very rich discussion, insights from all your respective country perspective and cross-country perspective. I would want to thank all the participants who have been actively contributing with questions online, and please feel free to still channel any more questions you may have through. We will get back to you with a sort of more reasoned set of response to your more detailed question that we couldn't address. And let me just before closing, just sharing few final remarks on my side. Indeed, we've heard about the great scale of challenge that the COVID situation puts to the economies, to employment, not only as maybe was expected at the early stage of the crisis in the short run, but very much in the medium to long run. And we've heard how countries have combined and will need to continue to combine measures of response which range across a wide spectrum from support to businesses to reforming and revisiting the labor protection framework, to the use of tax systems, to the use of contributory social protection systems, and of course the use of non-contributory system to the same objective, which is the one of providing wherever needed income support to families and workers that are faced by either the implications of being sick or being quarantined, or simply the implications of the economic downturn that many countries are facing. We have heard how countries are very creatively building on existing systems, and the importance of very much leveraging on systems that exist for identification, for registration, and for payment of citizens where those are available, in complementarity again across all these different government existing tools, and therefore requiring coordination and a whole government strategy and a common master plan for that universality in coverage to be achieved. We've also heard how in the immediate phase speed and coverage have been of paramount importance, but that probably in a more in a medium-term context, matters of tailoring the response, targeting, and making sure that relatively scarce public resources are put to the best use is going to become a primary concern, and therefore countries have to continue to assess how the impacts of the crisis are different across sectors, across employment situations, to make sure that those in most need are covered. Whereas while keeping in mind the widespread effects of the crisis. And finally, I think we've heard a call about keeping in sight and looking out for categories of workers who may fall through the cracks, the self-employed, on account workers, but also non-national workers. There was a question on persons with disabilities, which we couldn't address, but we will try to deal with in the Q&A sheet. So very much while devising a model that puts all government resources and systems towards universal protection, and doing so in a manner that can be over the medium term financially sustainable, keep looking for those who are falling through the cracks, those who have been missed out, and possibly introducing new measures that can, to the extent possible, respond to these needs. And finally, from Jordan, we've heard that this can also be an opportunity. It can be an opportunity for social protection. It can be an opportunity for expansion of social protection system, including of contributory systems. It can be an opportunity to enhance compliance and participation in the financing of social protection. So there is room to work on the response with a medium-term agenda in mind, including from a perspective of formalization. We look forward to continue the discussion with all of you. Thanks once more for being part of this exchange today. Thanks for bearing with us for a little bit longer than planned. And keep an eye on the socialprotection.org community, and particularly be ready to join in the next webinar on the which is announced on the website. And remember to join the online community on socialprotection.org. Thanks once more from me, and I believe on behalf of all the panelists. And have a lovely rest of the day, a good evening, and a good afternoon, depending on where you are. All the best. Cheers.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.